So Walter, we've been talking about your education and training and experience as a scientist. How do you reconcile being both a Christian and being a scientist? Isn't that fundamentally just a contradiction in terms?
In actual fact, once you understand what the Bible is all about, then science becomes real for the first time. Because you are investigating from a position of strength when you believe the Bible. And the corroboration is just so overwhelming that in the end, it's hard to understand why the others don't see it that way. Because all it is a paradigm shift 180 degrees. You're looking at the same evidence, you're just looking at it with a different perspective. So I have no problem with science and religion being reconciled, because the author of science and the author of the universe are one and the same thing.
But we're taught that science is supposed to be objective, with no preconceived notions, with no irrational beliefs, and that things should be investigated with pure objectivity and pure reason. So if you're a Christian first, isn't that a bias and therefore compromise the claim to be a scientist?
It could be perceived as such, but if the evidence fits, then why not accept it? Why? My question is always this: why must we exclude the evidence purely on the basis because it also has an aspect of it in the Bible? Therefore, if you exclude truth on that basis, then what you sit with is error. If you're going to say, I cannot accept a biblical flood because it comes from the Bible, and all the evidence out there points to a biblical flood, then you are excluding truth for the sake of error.
So you're working in an environment where I presume the vast majority of the people you are with day to day are non-believers. They're secular.
Strangely enough, some of them were actually believers, but they didn't believe the biblical paradigm.
How is that possible?
Well, they wouldn't believe a universal flood. The geologists that I worked with, they didn't believe in a universal flood, didn't fit into their science perspective. But even, just look at the fossils. The vast majority of all fossils are buried in mud deposits, in water deposits, but there was no flood. So they always have to rationalize that they were buried in floodplains, stretching over entire continents. These were mega floodplains, right?
The whole world was one floodplain at one time, according to the Bible.
It doesn't fit their paradigm. Or that you have a universal chalk layer, which means that there was a universal coverage of water, doesn't fit into the paradigm. So you have to exclude the fact for the sake of your science.
Mm-hmm. So how do you sustain your faith in the face of all that disagreement, I guess is one benign way of putting it, but rejection of your fundamental point of view?
In the beginning it's quite tough. And you feel, you don't want to go there, you want to just keep it to yourself and keep quiet and what have you. And eventually you get to the point where you understand this battle is not about you. This is a bigger battle. This battle is about truth. This battle is about Christ. And when you get to the point where you start understanding what the world is doing to Jesus Christ, how at every turn it is He that is downplayed. Never someone else, always Him. You never hear anything negative about any of the other religions. Oh, you're a Buddhist. Wow, that's great, Meditation, all of these things, wonderful. Oh, you're this, wonderful. Islam is taking a bit of flack at the moment, but even there, they're saying, that's just radical Islam. But when it comes to Jesus, it's just unbelievable what they do to Him. Whether you're listening to the media, whether you're listening to the scientific world, whatever you're listening to is always put down. The amazing thing, nobody argues with Islam when it propagates creation. No, the argument is with the Christian scientist. He is irrational. Islam, that's part of the package. He can be a creationist. That's packaged in there. That's to be understood. But no, not a Christian. You can't be a believer and a scientist at the same time. The war is not about me. The war is about truth.
How do you deal with the perception that it's Walter Veith saying this, that, and the other thing, and it's Walter Veith's truth, but he's got a strange paradigm and we shouldn't believe it?
Well, if it were my truth, then woe unto me, because why didn't I have it in the beginning? Where did I get it from? Didn't I get it from the Word? And wasn't it a war to accept the Word over what my paradigm was? So to make it my truth is pathetic. I had to adapt my truth. No. Eliminate my truth in order to accept the biblical paradigm.
So we're talking about sources, and you go to the reliable source.
And the issue is the Word. Yeah, that's the issue.
Explore some of the aspects of your evangelism and the transition to that work that you're doing in the service of the Lord. But you talked about prophecy being an important element in your conversion process. Could you explore that and expand a bit for us and let us understand what prophecies and just what import they did have?
Well, as I said, the very first one that really struck me was Daniel chapter 7. Being a Roman Catholic, even though not a practicing Roman Catholic, I was still a Roman Catholic. And the little horn power can be none other than Rome. And if you look at all the criteria as mentioned over there, the probability of it being someone else is 0. It's Rome. And it's the only one that fits. Like some Protestants said, if the little horn power in Daniel chapter 7 is not Rome, then Rome has bad luck to be so exactly like it.
Now, when you say Rome, let's be specific, because there's ambiguity in that term, I think, in some people's minds. What does the Bible say, and what do you mean by Rome?
The papal system.
The papal system.
I'm not talking about the people, I'm talking about the system. This is the system that arises at the right time, gets political status at the right time, maintains it for the exact prophetic period, changes God's laws, messes with God's times, persecutes the saints. All the criteria fit exactly. Uproots 3 kingdoms. There is just no other power over that period of time that can qualify. It can only be the papal system.
And was it Walter Veith that discovered this truth?
Absolutely
or was it the
not.
Adventist Church? Or where did this truth come from?
Well, this little carpenter, he happened to be an Adventist. He's the one who told it to me. And that brought me, of course, into an even greater conflict. What do I do with this Adventist thing? And let's face it, the Adventists are weird, right?
Many people believe so.
Well, their belief system is weird. Why is it weird? Because it's diametrically opposed. I'm talking about Bible, spirit of prophecy-based Adventism is diametrically opposed to what the world believes. So in the eyes of the world, they're weird. They're upstream people.
But the truths that this carpenter that was doing the renovation in your home shared with you about the prophecies of Daniel, where did those come from? He didn't create those, did he? What was his source for those truths?
He was himself a non-believer, and he also had been raised Catholic. In fact, even more so, he was raised by monks and priests directly. He was an orphan and he was raised by them directly. And he had also received this truth from another Adventist, outlining these prophecies to him. And so he had become a Seventh-day Adventist. I didn't even know he was a Seventh-day Adventist. I was just concerned with this biblical truth and the logic behind it, and it made perfect sense.
But there's nothing in the Bible that says the little horn power is the papal system. Is there? That explicit?
No, but the criteria are so explicit that it cannot be anyone else.
All those criteria apply to the papal system.
Absolutely everyone. All Paul's criteria, all the criteria in the book of Daniel, they all apply.
And when was that first realized?
Well, the early church fathers already realized it. In fact, the very earliest prophecies, well, Paul himself realized it. When he who withholds is taken away, and if you read the early church fathers, that's always a reference to the Roman imperial power. When that falls, then he, Antichrist, will come. Already the Antichrist power was working in his days. And there you have the story of Simon Magus, for example, who mixed paganism and witchcraft with Christianity, became the high priest to Nero, was probably instrumental in the beheading of Paul, so that he didn't have to be crucified because he was a Roman citizen. And he hated the real Peter because he had been rebuked by him. So he put on this cloak of Christianity. And this notion of mixing paganism with Christianity was also in vogue in Paul's day. He says it's already, this iniquity is already working amongst you. And then he gives the criteria. What he would do, he would sit in the temple of God, which according to Paul's writings is the church. You are the temple of the living God, he said. So it's not a temple of stone. And that he would be a Judas, because he's a son of perdition, a word used only twice in the Bible, one for the Antichrist and one for Judas. So he would have a form of godliness, denying the power thereof. In other words, taking the power to himself. He would be an overseer. He would have eyes, and he would have a mouth. He would be the teacher, and that's exactly what the papal system claims to be. And you go through all of those criteria, and you will find that it's exactly the same in Daniel. It's exactly the same in Paul. Take it into the book of Revelation, you have the same features. You have the conglomerate beast. Take Revelation chapter 13. All the beasts there represented. Count all the heads of that beast. And then go to Daniel chapter 7. You'll find all the same beasts of there. Count all the heads listed over there, and you come to the same number. It has 7 heads. Same system.
You're doing an evangelism series now on the Reformation and are arguing about the need to restore the Reformation. Did the Reformists in the time of Martin Luther, in their study of the Bible, as they began to break free of the papal chains, did they know and acknowledge and interpret the Bible in those days that the beast power of Revelation was truly the papal system?
They were all in one accord, every single one, with exactly these biblical criteria, and every single one of them, and even people like Spurgeon put it absolutely clearly. They say it fits like one of Chubb's keys, and there is no way that you can let this system off the hook. That is the Antichrist power. They all said it, every single reformer.
So this isn't a unique truth of the Seventh-day Adventist Church then?
No, it's a rediscovered truth that had been buried by anti-Protestant rhetoric on the part of the Jesuits. Alcázar, Ribera, they're the ones who invented preterism, futurism, which has been swallowed hook, line, and sinker by the churches today. But that's not a Protestant position. In fact, if you take the day-year principle, that's a Protestant position. It's not an Adventist position. You know, we have this literal 3.5-year position in the world out there now. Antichrist will come, he will rule for 3.5 years, etc., etc. That's a modern position. That's not a Protestant position. The day-year principle as applied to the prophecies of Daniel chapter 9 can only be fulfilled if you apply the day-year principle.
And where does the day-year principle come from? Is that just the
Protestants'
Protestants' idea?
It comes out of the Bible. Ezekiel already says take a day for a year. So if you apply the biblical principle, it works. So the Reformers used it. Then it was lost through the Counter-Reformation. And the Adventists picked it up again. So, with the remnant must be like the original.
Now, is this rediscovery of the truth of the beast power being equated to the papal system widely endorsed today within the Adventist Church?
Well, now that's an interesting question. Depends where you are. If you're traveling in the third world, absolutely the position. Unshakable, immovable, like a rock. If you go into the first world, there you have a dichotomy as you cannot believe. And you will have some people literally stand up and say, well, that theology is a childhood disease of former years within the Adventist Church. We've outgrown that. The papal system is not the Antichrist. Some people will sign little documents and join ecumenical little fan clubs to the papacy, which is very common these days. And I'm talking about prominent leaders within the church who will have that position. But the groundswell of the Seventh-day Adventist Church does not have that position. Of course, if they have that position, automatically they reject the spirit of prophecy by pretending not to reject it.
How so?
Well, what you do is you say, well, she was a wonderful person and she did have prophetic insight for her day. Or you say, well, she can be used for devotional purposes. But when it comes to prophetic interpretation or biblical exegesis or historic accuracy, it was just an opinion or just her own research. It wasn't divinely inspired.
But that's a form of critical thinking that in essence is saying this body of knowledge in the spirit of prophecy is only part right, but the other part is wrong. How do you determine which part is right and wrong if you follow that approach?
Exactly. Now, you know, when I came into the church, my first impression is, hang on, this is truth. But don't come with the spirit of prophecy. You know, I want the Bible and the Bible alone. I became a Seventh-day Adventist based on the Bible, not on the spirit of prophecy. I had nothing to do with the spirit of prophecy. I did not have one lecture on the spirit of prophecy. I don't even know how I managed to slip through the baptismal vows. Because as far as the spirit of prophecy was concerned, I didn't have a clue. I knew there was this body of writings, but I had nothing to do with it. And only a few months into becoming a Seventh-day Adventist, I got this phone call from an ex-colleague who was highly irate that I'd become a Seventh-day Adventist. And he said that you people have that kleptomaniac, well, let's not use the word, acronym for female dog amongst you. And he said it with such anger in his voice. And I thought to myself, wow, must be something in it. So I started reading it. And I must say that one of the first things I did was actually study, well, the first one I ever read was Desire of Ages. And if anybody says that book doesn't take you to Christ, then he's never read it. And you can reject his counter-arguments. But then I went through the whole health message. And I had huge problems with that, you know, because I had to change. And I made lists and lists and lists of her statements, which later I actually empirically tested in the laboratory. And that gave me such faith in the spirit of prophecy, it just blows the mind. And then you have all these critics. Now when you evangelize, you have all these critics, and you just go to the net. And you will find a list there that will boggle the mind. 90% of that list is just not understanding the plan of salvation. You know, don't understand the atonement, don't understand the issues of the plan of salvation, don't understand the sanctuary message. So, all right, so you can scrap that. And then you have all her so-called false prophecies. And there are many, many people within even the Adventist Church who take issue with some of these points. And I have just discovered over time that the more you research something, even if you find it incredible, eventually she always comes out on top. She's always right. And so I've come to the conclusion that this can only be inspired. And so I accept it. And if there's something I do not understand, I shelve it. And inevitably, 2, 3, maybe 4 years later, boom, there it is. Case in point, there are some in our ranks who say that where she writes, the French Revolution is a forerunner of what's going to happen in the entire world. They will say, but that's ridiculous. I mean, the French Revolution was a localized event, and nobody in his right mind would go around even imagining that this kind of revolution could be on a universal scale. And then you read Condoleezza Rice making a statement that George Bush is completing the work of the French Revolution on a universal scale, and you put the two together and you say, whoa, what do we have here? You know, it gets interesting.
So we're not talking about Walter Veith's truths. We're not talking about Seventh-day Adventist truths. For that matter, we're not even talking about the church truths. We're talking about God's truths.
God's truth, universal truth, cannot be changed.
Unchanging, invariable, everlasting.
That's right.
So you're really a messenger. When did you choose to be an active messenger and become an evangelist to spread this truth?
You know, once you discover this truth, if you don't want to tell everyone about it, there's something wrong with you. That's a conversion experience. And also, those people out there who don't know, what is their probability of salvation? You have to tell them. You have to tell them the truth. Compel them to come in. And so I'm driven to tell people. You get so much opposition that, like Jeremiah, sometimes you say, oh, I'm not going to speak about this anymore, Lord. I'm not going to do this anymore. I don't know why I should be bashed over my head all the time over this. I'm not going to do this anymore. I've had it. And then what does Jeremiah say? But your word was a fire in my heart and I could not. So there you go again. You get bashed again. Just keep on getting bashed.
And then stand back up and keep on going.
Keep on going. Let them clobber you, and you get up and you rethink your position. And what are they clobbering you on? So next time round, you just come out with more. Like, take secret societies. My first lecture on secret societies, it was like the world caved in on me. I had so much criticism, it was unbelievable. And I went back and I studied and I looked at the spirit of prophecy, and wow! These people that say that secret societies have nothing to do with prophetic truth, they've never read the spirit of prophecy. They are absolutely ignorant as far as the spirit of prophecy is concerned. White says that when we study the prophecies of the Revelation of the book of John, it will tell us to stay away from secret societies. She mentions the Freemasons by name. Now, if we study this prophecy and we find out that we have to distantiate ourselves from secret societies from that study, then surely it has something to do with secret societies, right? So when this criticism became so great, I had only one lecture and eventually 2 lectures on the subject. I withdrew for a while. And I studied it. And I had all the occult resources at hand, fortunately, because I come from this family background where this information was available. So in the end, instead of 2 lectures, they now have to contend with 36. Each of them an hour and a half to 2 hours long. And if they want to contend with it some more, I'll end up with 156, and they can put them in their pipe and smoke them.
Sounds like you have a lot of truth to dispense and communicate.
There's a lot of information out there. This is not a conspiracy. This is a confederacy. The Bible says there will be a confederacy, and the whole world will unite in unison with the beast, the papacy, to counteract the truth. And that's exactly what we're seeing. It's a confederacy, it's not a conspiracy. I have no beef with people saying, you might be wrong on that little point or on that little point, but the global picture, there is no denying it. It's not a conspiracy theory. We are dealing with a confederacy fact.
A confederacy fact.
Yes.
And the more you evangelize and teach these truths, surely there must be more and more increasing evidence to support your assertion.
It's amazing. And people don't know what kind of evangelistic tool this is. And I can just say that thousands of people, and that's not an exaggeration, thousands of people are embracing this truth because for the first time, this mess in this world starts making some form of sense. The overall picture is very clear. We might not have all the dots right. You know, we can shift them around a bit, but there's absolutely no doubt that there are forces working behind the scenes to bring about the exact prophecies as they are in the Bible.
Whose evangelism program is this? Is it Walter Veith's? Is it the South African Adventist churches? Is it a personal ministry? Or share some of that with us.
Well, how did it start? It started off simply with evolution creation. Those were my first lectures. Obviously, it's an important debate. And I had first-hand involvement, and if you want to be able to speak with authority on a subject, it's best to have first-hand experience. When it comes to Catholicism, I had first-hand experience. My whole life was a life of turmoil. Protestantism versus Catholicism. That's why I became an atheist. Doctrine of hell, all of these issues. And is it fair to malign the character of God like that? So that you would have this opinion of this disgusting, vengeful, malicious deity out there who will crush you just for the sake of not belonging to the right denomination. For that matter, nobody is saved by being a Seventh-day Adventist. You're being saved by a relationship. And don't think that I'm a Seventh-day Adventist because I enjoy joining some sect or other just to be weird and different. If there was a way out, I would have taken it. Who wants to be a Seventh-day Adventist and walk 180 degrees diametrically opposed to what the world is doing? Who wants to lose all his friends who don't want to eat meat with you anymore? Who wants to lose all his friends who don't want to be with you because you're not sharing a drink with them anymore? And all of those issues, and your family that turns against you, you must have your head read to become a Seventh-day Adventist.
Either that or know the truth.
Except if it's the truth.
Accepting it as the truth.
You're absolutely right. And I'm a Seventh-day Adventist because there's nowhere else to go. There's nowhere else to go. If you want to follow the truth, you have to become a Seventh-day Adventist. And even the Roman Catholic Church says that. It says if you want to follow the Bible, then you have to become a Seventh-day Adventist. Even Rome says that. There's no other choice. And you can argue and you can say whatever you like. If you really study it, there's no other way out. You have to be an Adventist. So I've had a lot of experience of this personal animosity. I've had people run on the stage threatening my life. In one of the East Bloc countries, they stormed the stage. They literally said they would kill us. So it was hair-raising. And the amazing way in which God helped me every single time. And I've had amazing stories. And that sustained me. So when it comes, I already expect it. And God has taken me through every single one of them. And like one friend of mine says, man is immortal until his work is done.
You spoke earlier about being led to Christ through your reasoning and your intellect, and that it wasn't did not start off as an emotional, heartfelt experience.
Didn't start off, no.
There is an interesting dichotomy amongst many Christians between the brain and the heart. And it seems that in some people it's either one to a fault or the other to a fault. And not many Christians where there's a good balance. How did you, as a scientist and a man of reason, move from being just an intellectually convinced of the legitimacy of your faith to one whose heart joined in and you became more balanced?
Well, one day, I got the Bible and I got the interpretation of the Bible. So I got this description of the most magnificent, the most beautiful, the most fantastic character that you can imagine, the character of God. It's like getting a description of the most beautiful, the most fantastic, the most intellectual, the most romantic, you name it, woman in the world. And you have this list, and you say, wow, this is one amazing woman. But you don't know her, you've never met her. You're going to have a relationship with her. But you have this list, and you know what this is the ultimate. Wow, if you could get to know this woman, wow, that would be great, That's how I was. This is God. I discovered his character, and everything that I hated before and that had made me an atheist, I saw was a deception and a lie to break down his character. And the more you study his character, you realize what he is and who he is. But you can't have a relationship until you get to know him. And so yes, I had the list, I had the description, that was the ultimate, that's what I had to get to know. And then the mill of life starts taking over. And who puts you through that mill? It's God who puts you through that mill. And I don't believe for one moment that God wasn't there when I was an atheist. I believe I had a praying mother. And God permitted me to go through all that atheism and all that atheistic training, just as he allowed Moses to go through all the wisdom of the Egyptians. And when he needed that wisdom, it could be turned against the evil. So even in my atheism, I believe God was there, and he'd never ever lost sight of me.
You just may not have known it at the time.
I just didn't know him. But I think my mother's prayers, or whatever the circumstances, I'll find out one day, actually he was there from the beginning. And when I started this Christian walk, he threw me in the deep end. I started evangelizing with a well-known evangelist. And we had experiences in those first evangelistic meetings where the battle between good and evil was so real. I mean, really real, to the point of demonic manifestations. And the good and the evil, the contrast there was so real. And I had to live through it. And you get to the point where you cannot get through it unless you lean on that arm, because there's no way you can fight this battle by yourself. There's no way you can do an evangelistic campaign if God is not with you. All the powers of hell are arraigned against you. You have no chance. And this is where you see the battle, and you see the consequences, and you see the war, and you see sometimes the violence, and you see every time how God sneaks you out of there, and how you come out the other side, sustained by prayer, and he becomes a real, actual, factual, trustworthy entity. The Bible calls him the rock, immovable. And no matter what the storm is, no matter what the circumstances is, he's there. And that's how you get to know him. And once you know him on that basis, that relationship is no longer a list of the perfect being. It is a relationship in verity. You actually experience it.
Now, there are many in the churches and the Adventist church that believe a good job is being done on evangelism and outreach and spreading the gospel and bringing new converts into the church. But there's also a view that that's sort of where the job ends, and that new converts are left sort of abandoned with this truth, but not knowing how to put that truth into action in their lives and how to truly grow a relationship with this wondrous being you've described. Can you share with us, from your experience, how to develop that relationship and get to know God such that the relationship grows?
You see, there's a tendency to latch on to man. And that is a very poor tendency, because man will fail you, no matter how perfect he is. You know, even in a marriage relationship, my wife is not still married to me because I'm perfect. She's married to me in spite of my imperfections, right? And so it is with any relationship. There's only one that's absolutely rock steady, and that's Christ. People must be absolutely trained to make the transition, to never ever rely on a speaker. A speaker can fall away tomorrow. And the only mentor, ultimate mentor that you must strive for is Christ. There's no other mentor. We have also this tendency, we want to fill the church. And so we think, well, the distinctive features of the faith are somewhat uncomfortable, so we water them down. And my evangelistic approach is exactly the opposite. I have learned in my evangelism to take the very issues which are the problematic ones and make them prominent. So if Ellen White is a problem, give a lecture on her. Off the bat. If the Sabbath is the problem, lecture on it. If whatever is a problem, lecture on it. Show why. And take away that ground. The Bible says, teach them all things whatsoever I have commanded you. Not just a spattering and then bring them into the church and let them float there. When they come in, they must know. And in fact, they walk in and they say, excuse me, what's going on in this church? I left the world for this, and the other, and I now become a Seventh-day Adventist, and what is this stuff doing in this church? No ways will I come into this church. That's the challenge. So I take that one straight off the bat as well, and that's not very comfortable with some people. They hate it. I tell them straight, you are coming into the most pathetic church on the planet. And if it's not pathetic, then please leave it, because the Bible says it has to be pathetic. You turn the argument around. Yeah. The Bible says they're blind, pitiful, poor, wretched, naked, lukewarm, fast asleep. That's the church you're coming into. Come and have a look. Sure fits the criteria. Thanks a lot. Now, how do I know that there's a difference here? You know, I come out of Babylon, you say this and this and this is Babylon, what's it doing here? Well, you see, an enemy came and sowed these tares. What shall we do? Shall we rip up the tares? And no, let them grow together until the harvest. Leave that to the Lord, unless you, perhaps by chance, rip up what you think is a tare, and it turns out to be wheat. Or what about this conference president? My goodness, look at him. He's so apostate Why isn't he on the other side? Why isn't he part of the other rank? Or is he? You know, we have quite a few of those. My answer to that is he Aaron or is he Caiaphas? How do you know? If you look at the actions of Aaron, he made the golden calf. He said, bring in that rock music, let's go nuts here. And what was he? He was Aaron. He was easily influenced. He went with the flow. But there came a point where he repented. And it's not for me to judge whether he's Aaron or whether he is Caiaphas and is going to harden his heart and crucify the Lord.
And I think that statement is certainly supported by the Bible. It's not up to us to judge.
Not
That's
my job.
God's job.
No.
He's the ultimate judge and only judge. But aren't we told in the Bible that we should definitely, and in the spirit of prophecy, that we should reprove error and reach out to our erring brothers and sisters to try to help them see the error of their ways? I mean, Matthew 18 provides us a formula on how to reach out to someone who's transgressing.
Well, within the church, private sins must be privately rebuked. Public sins must be publicly rebuked. And there are biblical examples. Jesus rebuked Peter publicly because he had a public denial. It was in front of all the other apostles that he said, asked him the questions, do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? So that in front of all, these things could be set straight. But when it comes to public evangelism, my job is not to attack my church. This church is the apple of the Lord's eye. And I have no right to turn my weapons against my church. But I have an admonition. Let the truth do the cutting. Present the truth. And if you feel the pain in your corn, then is it me attacking the corn, or is it the truth falling like a brick on the corn? That's the question we have to ask ourselves.
Walter, what advice would you offer from your experience? What advice would you offer to Adventist church members who are faced with a circumstance where their pastor or their church leaders are either teaching non-biblical doctrine or messages or encouraging them to accept error in their Christian walk?
Well, in my personal experience, I come across it a lot because I travel from area to area. Some churches are fanatically extreme. And people often confuse a straight message with extremism. Extremism is not a straight message. Extremism is making a particular behavior paramount to your salvation. That's extremism. So you elevate diet, for example, to a position of prominence in the plan of salvation. That's extremism. That's just as bad. It's probably worse than liberalism. Liberalism is, everything goes, and rock and roll, and swinging hips, and this, and we're all right, Jack, and that's liberalism. There's hope for a liberal. It's very hard for a fanatic to come back into the boat. So people ask me, what are you? Are you a liberal or are you a conservative? I say, I'm a liberal conservative. Excuse me, I'm liberal with others and conservative with myself. So I get into these churches and everything goes. I mean, I've been in churches where the pastor will come onto the stage with an electric guitar around his neck and an earring hanging from one ear and a hairstyle which looks like a guy stuck his finger in the plug, you know what I mean? In the power port. I've had that. And I've had these ultra-conservative, if you don't do this or that, sizzle fits, you've had it. I've had them both sides. And what do you do in that case? I go to these churches. Well, I'll tell you a story. I was a camp meeting speaker in a first world country. Thousands of people at the camp meeting. A lot of the preachers at this camp meeting went over a period of about 10 days. A lot of the preachers were trained by outside institutions, outside of the, well, why not mention them? Willow Creek type education and Willow Creek type preaching, very emotional. And if everybody doesn't break down in tears and send the shares of Kleenex rising the next day, then the sermon was not a success. And you're sitting in that circumstance, and you realize this is not blatant error, what they are preaching, but it's dramatization of that which should be very plain. And when it comes to the youth, what happened in those places is just unbelievable. The youth hall had a band and a drum set that would have satisfied 5 mega bands today, and they would have been happy with that drum set. But the music wasn't of the quality that you would wish it to be. But the youth was actually jumping on chairs, bashing their posteriors together, swaying their arms, absolute din. And I'm thinking to myself, excuse me, where am I? Is this a Seventh-day Adventist gathering? And between the meetings, you have time, it's your turn, then it's someone else's turn, and then this and that. I'm walking around this place, and I hear this noise and this din, and it's the youth going berserk. And I come there, and there's a double door, and here stands this young black fellow. Judge him about in his 20s, early 20s, maybe 20, 21, 22 perhaps, and he's standing outside. So I idle up to him and I have a little conversation with him. And I say to him after a while, and I say, you're standing here all alone. Why aren't you with your friends in there? He says to me, well, I can't go in there. I said to him, why not? He says, well, my Jesus isn't in there. So we get talking, you see. There's some chairs sitting there. It's sort of in a foyer, a big foyer, and the one hall goes off there and the other hall goes off there. And he says, do you mind if I talk to you? And I said, no, let's have a chat. And we had such a nice conversation. Next day, again, you have this hour, that hour, youth hour, He says, do you mind if we talk same time tomorrow? I said, no, I don't mind at all. It'll be nice. Next day, I get there. 25 young people. We're sitting in the foyer, we're having a nice little chat. The din and the noise is going on over there. Can we do the same tomorrow? I said, no problem, I'm free then time. Look at the roster. No, I'm not speaking. Next day, 200 young people. 250 young people. And we're just chatting. And all of them say, we want nothing to do with that. It's peer pressure that's bringing us into that. And experiences like that tell me that no matter how bad it looks, God still has 7,000 who haven't bowed the knee to Baal. And they're just not prepared to stand up. And you have the Adventist Youth Congress that we have. And there are thousands of young people standing up and say, listen, we don't want this anymore. We're sick and tired of being fed inconsequential, brainless entertainment. Give us food. We're very good at giving inconsequential, brainless entertainment. Oh, your kind of preaching will empty the church. I've never found it. In fact, I've always found it filling up, and the young people especially standing up for this truth. Young people get on fire for this truth. So when I go into a gathering like that and I see these things, my body language will say it all. I will not get up and say, what is this apostasy going on here? And believe me, I've had apostasy. I've heard stuff preached where my hair stands on edge. And when they start speaking this stuff, I'll take out my Bible and I'll start reading my Bible. And people watch you, you know. They say, why were you reading your Bible? And I said, well, I wasn't getting too much out of what I heard, so I thought I might as well read my Bible. Or when they sing this swinging stuff and there's these mantras. Oh, I can't stand these mantras. You know, these repetitive prayers. Prayer songs where the same thing over and over and over. And then they attach this melodious, beautiful, sweet melody that sweeps people into this euphoria. It's brainless. You know, when I was pastoring a church, I said to the youth, just do me a favor. Before you sing a song, read it. And when you've read it loud out to the audience, if it's not brain dead, then you can sing it. And it's amazing. You do that, you know, isn't he beautiful? Isn't he, 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 isn't he? I mean, you know, that's ridiculous to even put a melody to something like that. And so people start realizing this.
So for every example or story of people realizing that there is that problem and being more attracted to the truth and the true power source, when you look at our church today, the Adventist Church, there are lots of negative influences.
Oh,
things like...
It's coming in like a flood.
A flood of anti-doctrine and non-biblical teaching and rejection of the spirit of prophecy and homosexuality and all kinds of issues that seem to communicate a sense of division, erosion, collapse of the church. What's your view of that? And do you have confidence and faith for the remnant church in the face of this apostasy?
Well, aren't we the antitype of Elijah? Aren't we the fulfillment of the Elijah message? What was it like in the days of Elijah? Elijah said, Lord, I am the only one left. They've all gone to pot. The king is in cahoots with that woman Jezebel. They're bringing in sun worship. They're going berserk. I'm the only one left. And the Lord said to him, sorry, pal, there are 7,000 others that haven't bowed the knee. No. Then he says, all right, now's your opportunity. Go get them all together. And there are all the Baal priests and all the Ashtoreth priests, and we have them, you know. We've got the same rubbish in our church. And then he preaches this simple, straightforward, absolute, faith-bound little message. And he asks the people, where do you stand? And what's the Bible say? They answered him, not a word. And we are there. We're saying, oh, what's going on here, Lord? And where are all these people that's supposed to be watchmen on the wall of Zion, allowing all of this, let's call it drivel, to come into the church? But when it came push to shove, what happened? God's church was triumphant. Not that. This church will go through to the kingdom, but there will be a mega shaking. And I don't think we have any idea of the magnitude of the shaking that's going to come. God will pass, and I'm quoting Spirit of Prophecy, whole churches by, if we do not repent and come back to the worship of the true God.
You have been accused by some people who've attended your seminars as stating that the Seventh-day Adventist Church is in fact Babylon.
Well, I can only say that those people who accuse me of that, and there are many that are of that ilk, have never attended my meetings. It's always interesting that those that have the most to say about it, including leaders, have never, ever, ever been to my meeting. They hear hearsay from some liberal individual who totally distorts what I say, and then base their judgment on that. And the less they know, the more they have to say about this issue. I have never, ever, nor will I ever say that the church is Babylon. A whore, perhaps, but not Babylon.
And that's a biblical truth, not a Walter Veith truth.
That's the biblical truth. And the Lord even raised up a prophet to marry a prostitute because that's what he's married to. Oh, I've sat in ecumenical meetings in our own church where the cardinal was addressed with such slimy language that you would just want to get sick and say, we are so ecumenically inclined, we are so this, we are so that. But fortunately, right on the left and on the right of me were faithful Seventh-day Adventist pastors who were just as nauseated as I was. So yes, we have these people that do that. And people say, well, isn't the church Babylon? Look, we have people here in the ecumenical movement. They've signed the document. Oh yes, we have signed the document. And this one and that one. And we're in this council and that council. This church is Babylon. This church is not Babylon. This church has a bottom-up structure. And I know that there are many in leadership that have this wishful thinking that we have a top-down structure. But they cannot get past the spirit of prophecy, which says we have a bottom-up structure. So when they say we have a top-down structure, even if they put it into an official report to the government, it's still wishful thinking on their part. Spirit of prophecy says bottom-up structure. And that means when there is a particular set of doctrines to be decided upon, it is the world church that decides. And the world church happens to be largely third world, and they stick with the Bible and the spirit of prophecy. I've sat in meetings, mega meetings, faith and science meetings, where one whole division will have exactly the opposite report of the next division. In fact, I was made spokesman for my division. And my opening words was, it is with great pride and joy that I read to you the statement of my division. Beautiful. Absolutely crystal clear as to where we stand and what we believe. And the other divisions throwing a cadenza over this issue. Now, if some president or even some union, or even some conference, or even some division goes against the general teaching of the church and does exactly what the church as a body denies, that does not make my church Babylon. It doesn't even make that group Babylon, but it certainly makes her a prostitute. So yes, we have prostitutes in the church that have prostituted themselves. But this church is the apple of the Lord's eye, and it will go through to the kingdom.
Amen. Walter, it's been a real pleasure having this discussion. Thank you for joining us. Please come back to British Columbia soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
God bless.